Hello, everybody. This video that I'm going to make today is going to be hard to make, but I feel like it is an important MMA story and even an important sports story and even a news story as well. Chuck Liddell, he isn't just a hero in the mixed martial arts arena. He's also a pretty big celebrity as far as UFC fighters go, dating back to the older days, and even he's my personal favorite UFC fighter of all time. I used to buy all his pay-per-view fights, even when I really couldn't afford it, over a decade ago when I was in my 20s. One of the biggest things is he was very feared in the ring. And just watching him move across the ring, the Iceman was always one punch away from ending your night. He was a wrestler in college, a really good one, and a kickboxer before he ever stepped foot in the UFC. But his trademark style during his championship years in the UFC was a counterattack. He would always wait for you to come in with your attack and then counter you with devastating blows if it took more than one. He would sort of move backwards or to the side, missing the attack, and then boom, he would just catch you. He had great timing, and, if he caught you, it was lights out. If he caught you good, especially. Chuck Liddell was just a total badass, with his mohawk, his bravado, his cool demeanor. To me, personally, he seems like the kind of guy you'd want to have a beer with. And, to me, he's still badass no matter what. His UFC record is 21-9. That's not counting his collegiate wrestling or his earlier kickboxing records. This is just the UFC and Pride fights, because Pride was consumed by the UFC and bought out years ago. So in this video, I will be talking about some of the fights that happened in Pride because I consider them UFC now. But anyway, now we're going to go over some of his notable wins in the UFC. So there are a lot of wins we could go over as far as Chuck Liddell goes, but just to hit some of the highlights, his wins over Kevin Randleman, UFC 31 in 2001, that was a great knockout, and you see it on a lot of highlight reels even today. In 2002, UFC 37 and a half, Vitor Belfort, of course that was a unanimous decision. The all-famous head kick KO at UFC 40, which would be the first one against Renato Babalu Sobral. That was in 2002, all the way back there. Some of his other notable wins, Tito, UFC 47, and that was in 2004. You had the win and avenging his loss against Randy Couture in 2005 at UFC 52. That was a KO in the first round due to punches. That same year in August 2005, UFC 54, he took out Jeremy Horn with the TKO in the fourth due to punches, and that was another loss that he avenged there. Ended up coming back and beating Randy Couture again in 2006, UFC 57, second round KO. Babalu Sobral again in 2006, UFC 62. And then that win against Tito in December 2006, UFC 66. And in my opinion, that was, sort of the end of his great run as far as knockouts and wins go, because that next year, UFC 71 in 2007, he would take that devastating, loss to Quentin Jackson. I don't know if I should say devastating. I mean, it was in the first round. It wasn't near as bad as the one that he would lose to Rashad Evans in UFC 88 in 2008, which a lot of people believe that was really the beginning of the end. But if you look at his record here, he did have 4 straight losses, including this latest one to Tito. And seeing some of these knockouts, like I said, 8-10 years ago to Rich Franklin and UFC 115 in 2010, Mauricio Shogun Hua at UFC 97 was another knockout. And in 2008, like I just mentioned before, that one to Rashad Evans. So he's taken some really bad knockouts and some bad punches. And so to see him come back, 8 years later after that last knockout that he took to Rich Franklin is really sad and devastating for Chuck Liddell fans. And in my opinion, for a fan of any kind of a combat sports, MMA sports, or anything like that, because just seeing anybody get, crumpled by kind of a medium strength Tito punch, it is sad. But you know what? That's what happens. And I'm hoping that, that's kind of the end of that as far as Chuck Liddell's fighting career. Maybe we'll see him back as an analyst or something. So the main reason I wanted to make this video is because I just felt that it was a super sad moment seeing Chuck Liddell get knocked out that last Saturday night during Oscar De La Hoya's, the Golden Boys, MMA freak show, I guess you could call it, that transpired. And again, that was November 24th, and it was held in California. Somehow they sanctioned the fight, and I'm not really sure how the Athletic Commission let this slip through, but I guess they felt that it was still going to be okay for those two guys to fight. And in Tito's case, I would say, he looked great out there. But I even feel during the middle and end of Chuck Liddell's Supreme Championship reign, even going back, over 10 years ago, I don't feel that he ever really moved that gracefully, even towards the end of that part of his career, even before the 4 knockouts happened. Or I guess I should say the 3 knockouts that happened. He always had that big gut, and he always kind of moved around slightly stiff, but that was kind of his style. He was always ready to hit you, and I feel like because of that, he was already kind of, he didn't keep his hands up by his face necessarily. And talking about that, he always kind of had that gut. And in fact, I felt like his gut was even maybe slightly smaller than it used to be for this last fight. But in my opinion, there was a lot more muscle in his stomach area than it looked like in the past. And maybe that's where he got all his explosive power from. Of course, Chuck Liddell is 48 years old during this last fight. He was definitely super slow. Even in the warm-ups and the sparring and training sessions that were on camera and televised, he also looked very similar to how he looked in that fight. He seemed to be extra stiff, just really stiff, hobbled, and I don't know if he had a hip injury, or his body's just broken down badly after all these years, or getting smashed so many times in the past. But I just felt like, he sort of didn't know what to do out there, almost like he was phoning it in. But then again, I have no idea what was really going on in his mind or how he actually felt during the fight. All I can do is assume, and you have your theories about it. But and again, I hate saying these things about my favorite UFC fighter ever, but I hope he really got paid really well for this fight, because and he doesn't get screwed over by Oscar De La Hoya on this deal, who obviously is a boxing legend, and Golden Boy Promotions is a very awesome boxing promotion even to this day, somewhat. I just don't feel like he really knew how to really put this fight on and how to market it, but even more so, from what I understand, the rest of the card wasn't very good either. So even in 2009, 2010, before Chuck Liddell's retirement, we all noticed that, Chuck was a lot stiffer then, slower, his timing was off, which is, timing's important, because him being able to time punches, counter his opponents, that was always his bread and butter, is his timing and having the power, at the right time too. And he would use his wrestling. He was, like I said before, a collegiate wrestler, but he didn't really wrestle people down or anything, especially during, the middle and later part of his career at all. He used it to stay on his feet or return to his feet quickly. It was really, he had an amazing takedown defense. I don't know if I say, legendary, but it was pretty darn good. And so, but yeah, it's just really sad seeing a guy who is a decade past his prime and, out there fighting. But that being said, and I did want to go ahead and spend just a little bit of time talking about some other guys who fought at an advanced age. Now, I know there's a lot of them I could talk about, at least 10 to 20 that are notable. But just some of the ones I want to talk about that stick in my mind. Randy the Natural Couture. He's the only person over the age of 40 to have won a UFC championship fight, having done so 4 times. His last UFC fight was a loss against Lyoto the Dragon Machida in 2011, and he was 48 years old during that fight, Randy was. But I still feel like Randy had more of a ring presence than Chuck did at that same age, and he still looked dangerous in the ring. Randy, of course, was slower a little bit during, this part of his career, sure, but, not super noticeably like Chuck. And I never felt like Randy was completely out of a fight, even when he was almost 50. Another one that I want to talk about is Anderson the Spider Silva. He actually, won a fight against Derek Brunson, who is a, really tough guy last year at age 41, 42. And he's 43 now, and he's scheduled to fight a young phenom, Israel Adesanya. Hopefully I didn't butcher that too bad. February the 10th, next year in 2019 at UFC 234. Hopefully that fight will happen, but again, we're talking about a 43-year-old Anderson Silva fighting a really tough young guy, so we'll see how that goes. In his prime, of course, Anderson Silva, I mean, I'd put him right up there, close with Chuck as one of the greatest, 3 or 5 UFC fighters of all time. Of course, I know that's debatable. And then I'm going to kind of switch gears here a little bit to boxing. And I know that that's, not comparing apples to apples at all, but I did want to talk about a couple boxers that fought, into older age. Bernard Hopkins was one of them, obviously. Bernard Hopkins was still winning light heavyweight title fights at 49 years old, and everybody knows about that, and he's fought forever, it seemed like. But even he would go on to lose his last 2 fights and his championship at, age 51. So, the last couple years, finally a couple of, younger guys got him. And, of course, the big one that I'm sure everybody's thinking about is George Foreman. I mean, wow. What can we say about George Foreman? He was still fighting at 48 years old also. That 48 years old keeps coming up. He was a totally different kind of animal, though. I remember, I have very nostalgic thoughts about George Foreman because my grandpa, rest his soul, I lost him last year. He and I used to watch a lot of boxing together when I was growing up. And, of course, George Foreman's come back in the 90s and winning fights, against the likes of Michael Moore. I'll never forget that short punch that I was like, wow, this guy is just out there knocking out young, tough dudes. But anyway, George Foreman started fighting professionally in the late 60s. I mean, just wow. Just, a career that spanned over 30 years in the ring. But anyway, I guess enough about that. But as a fan of the sport of fighting sports in general, MMA, the UFC, I feel that Dana White, who's not only the president of the UFC, but also a close friend of Chuck Liddell's, he had been mentioning that, Chuck had no business fighting anymore for years. And, I guess he was right. I mean, he hadn't fought in over 8 years, and he didn't just, look worse. He actually, was slower and stiffer, and then that chin that, he used to have, that he could take hard punches and come back and knock people out. That chin is not only still gone, but even looked like it was more gone today. He just can't take those hits anymore, and rightfully so. I mean, he's taken enough of them over the years. Tito, actually, I kind of briefly mentioned before that I've never been a huge fan of Tito Ortiz's, but I do respect his work ethic, especially for this last fight and how well he got into shape for the fight. I'll be honest, I thought Tito looked better than he did the first 2 fights when he was, only in his early 30s or even late 20s. I'm not exactly sure how old he was back when those other 2 fights happened, but he had to be close to 30 years old. But, and Tito's never been known for his knockout power. He got the job done this time, and I guess he avenged those 2 prior losses, and to some extent to of course, an aging and stiff and super slow Chuck the Iceman Liddell. And like I said, I just thought it was an awful thing that happened out there, but, he is a grown man. Both of them are, and, so it's, what can you do but sit back and hope we don't have to see that kind of thing happen again. But anyway, I wanted to go ahead and cover this. Please put down in the comments what you thought about the fight. Chuck Liddell's decision to take the fight in the first place. Did he really need the money that bad? Or is it kind of like Dana White and Brendan Schaub were discussing, and that, they've been on record saying Chuck just loves to fight. He's a fighter. That's all he knows, and he just couldn't give it up yet. And he just, wants to get out there and bang. And, maybe that's the case. So obviously UFC fighters are paid much more than they were during Chuck's heyday, and that could be a factor. But thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Have a great day.